Hey, yo, what's up everyone? Welcome back to the channel. This is Smart TCG, and today I'm going to be going over my top 10 decks in the post-rotation format. Temporal Forces is the brand new set that just released, and we also have the upcoming European International Championships and Orlando Regionals that many of you are preparing for. This is going to be a video going over my top 10 decks. We're going to start at number 10 and work our way all the way up to number 1. If you enjoy the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. It's the best way to support me as a creator. And if you're looking for any of these brand new cards or Pokemon TCG product, make sure to go check out GameGridSLC.com. You can use my code SmartTCG for 5% off on your next order. With that being said, let's hop into number 10. Alrighty, hopping into number 10 here, we have Ancient Box. Ancient Box is a deck that has been getting a lot of talk recently, and I think it has a lot of potential in the post-rotation format. You have the Baby Roaring Moon with attack that does 70 plus 10 more for each ancient card that you're able to get in the discard pile. You have powerful cool attackers like Charizard at the beginning of the game that deal a respectable amount of damage, just setting up those easy knockouts for Roaring Moon. You have things like Fluttermane as well, which can slow down the opponent, and you also have Great Tusk, which is able to mill your opponent and catch them off guard. I've decided to include not one, not two, but 3 of the Cobalion with that Justified Law. If you're able to get 3 of them down, you're able to do 90 more damage to your opponent's dark type Pokemon, which is able to help out against that Charizard EX matchup. Charizard EX is one of the most powerful and popular decks in the standard format, so having that ability to reach that 330 is something that is really important, especially with a lot of them playing cards like Collapse Stadium and also Professor Tauros. You really don't want to necessarily be putting yourself in a 2-shot war against them due to the fact that they have those healing factors that they can use. So having the triple Cobalion is going to allow you to consistently get at least 2 of those down, making it so that you can do plus 60, which makes those knockouts much more achievable. We also have Radiant Greninja as well for support. We got the Ancient Engine support line with Explorer's Guidance and Professor Sada's Vitality, along with one Boss's Orders as the other supporter. Rest of the list, a lot of 4 and 3-ofs. We got 4 Earthen Vessel, 4 Nest Ball, 4 Pokegear, 3 Pokemon Catcher for that consistency. Then for some of the 1-ofs, we got 1 Ultra Ball, 1 Dark Patch, and 1 Awakening Drum. I've decided to go with the Awakening Drum as of right now. Helps you draw, but I am also considering Prime Catcher. Prime Catcher is still a very powerful card, and you're able to have a little bit more control over some games. Works really nicely with Pokestop as well. You can Pokestop into a Gust effect because some games you're going to be playing with the prizes tied or you potentially up, so there'll be some situations where you might want to still Gust, but you don't necessarily have the option to do so if Counter Catcher is that only card you have in your hand. So we also have 1 Super Rod, 1 Palpad as well to get back supporters. Just makes a lot of sense with that Pokestop. 4 Ancient Booster Energy Capsule as well to increase that HP. And then we also have 3 Pokestop along with 9 energy to round out the list. I've been seeing a lot of people play 10 energy. I think you can get away with 9, especially with the 4 Earthen Vessel along with also the Dark Patch. You shouldn't have an issue getting these Pokemon powered up. Roaring Moon, I think, has a lot of potential. The biggest thing that holds it back is honestly its consistency. This is a deck that will be able to set up and function in the early game. However, that middle to late game when it's getting hit with Ionos and Rock Sands is really the #1 thing that's holding this deck back. When this deck sets up, it has a ton of potential. It's just a major glass cannon and is incredibly weak to hand disruption. So I've been trying to find a list that's able to survive through that consistent hand disruption that many of like the most popular decks in the format are able to use. So that's an issue that it has, but it has a very high power level and definitely has a chance to beat some of the most powerful decks in the format, as long as you can set up. Coming in at number 9 here, we have Gardevoir. Now, Gardevoir is a deck that a lot of you thought had died off entirely. However, it still actually has a lot of potential in the post-rotation format. You have Arven paired up with TM Evolution, which allows you to get into double Curlia on the very first turn of the game, which then allows you to get into your powerful Gardevoir EX and also the Glade as well, giving you lots of options and ways to power up either Drifloon or Screamtail or Mew EX, which are going to be some of your main attackers. Drifloon and Screamtail become more and more threatening with things like Hero's Cape and also Luxurious Cape at your disposal. Hero's Cape adds a really nice element to this deck, allowing you to take big one-shots without having to always use Luxurious Cape, due to the fact that Luxurious Cape does have that drawback of giving up 2 prizes when a Pokemon that has this tool card attached to it is knocked out. Deck is still strong. I think it's a lot better than what people give it credit for. It can run into some issues with Charizard if they're able to Lost Vacuum away those tool cards, knock out those Pokemon that are relying on the tool card to stay alive, and then you know, potentially use a boss's orders to knock out a Gardevoir, let's just say, oftentimes being able to swing 3 prizes. So that's an issue that you can sometimes run into. However, if you are able to get set up, you have pretty decent matchups against a lot of things. Matchups like Lugia, pretty solid. Your Lost Box matchups have always been relatively decent. Your Giratina matchup is pretty solid with things like EUIC. So you really have a lot of you know, opportunities to beat a lot of the top decks in the format. And I think the deck is better than what people are giving it credit for. Definitely going to be a surprise deck in my opinion heading into upcoming tournaments. I think people are going to be still quite surprised at just how good this deck still is, and I definitely expected to see some play moving forward. Next up, we have the Iron Hands Future Box deck that has been seeing a lot of hype recently. I think this deck actually has a lot of potential. I think Iron Hands is a very, very powerful Pokemon, being able to punish decks like Lugia V-Star, which is one of the most powerful decks in the standard format. Being able to use that Iron Hands EX as amp you very much is very, very good. Being able to take multiple prize cards against small HP things very early is oftentimes just too overwhelming for decks to handle. Iron Crown, really cool Pokemon that you can also attack with Psychic Energy. Psychics also help out in the stall matchup, meaning that they can't necessarily lock Iron Crown always into the active and leave it stuck useless. You can at least now potentially attack with Iron Crown, which is a reason as to why I play the Psychics. And I'm also just testing out the Miraidon EX as well, just to see if it makes any sense in the deck, just to try it out. I have EUIC as well with that genome hacking, and also Restart, just a great card to be able to, you know, draw out of Roxanne's, Iono's, and then we also have the Miraidon, the baby one, which has that peak acceleration, which is a really powerful attack, being able to take early knockouts on low HP things or damage high HP things, allowing it so that Iron Hands can take knockouts. We have the Arven engine. Arven is just great in this deck, being able to find your batons, your future boosters, and your item cards that you need. I've decided to go with the heavier boss's orders count as opposed to counter catcher. I think boss is significantly better than the counter catcher engine, because if your opponent knows you only play counter catcher, then they can kind of play around that fact to play the game a little bit slower, knowing that you don't have the capabilities to gust. I also like prime catcher a little bit more, especially in this list if we're not going to be running the Raichu. You don't need something like the reboot bots to be able to load tons of energies to then use the Raichu to hit for big knockouts. I've kind of found that prime catcher is just a little bit better in most circumstances, especially being searchable with the Arven. List is pretty standard, pretty consistent, does what it's able to do. It does struggle against things like Charizard. Charizard can be a very, very iffy matchup. It can also struggle against decks like Stall as well. Definitely not a great matchup, along with also the Giratina matchup, specifically Arceus Giratina, which can be very, very tricky for the deck to deal with. But it does have a great Lugia matchup and can definitely pounce on a lot of those low HP decks, like the Lost Zone Toolbox decks, which have been seeing a resurgence over the past couple of days. And I think that deck is actually quite strong, which we'll go into in a little bit, but that deck's also been seeing a big resurgence, which Iron Hands is able to do pretty decently against. So Iron Hands is a solid deck, definitely has plenty of weaknesses, but it definitely has some very, very good matchups, which gives it a lot of credibility heading into this upcoming post rotation. Next up, we have Chien-Pao Baxcalibur. Chien-Pao Baxcalibur has been getting a lot of hype, and I think it lives up to it in the post-rotation format. Gaining Cypher Maniac's code breaking is incredibly powerful with cards like Radiant Greninja, Pokestop, and also the Bibero, allowing you to draw into those 2 cards you put on top of the deck. Really, really solid deck, being able to pretty much hit unlimited damage with that Chien-Pao, being able to take down those 1 prize decks with Iron Hands, being able to force your opponent to put down Manaphy with the threat of Radiant Greninja, and just always having a lot of versatile attackers is really what makes this one of the most powerful decks. It can be considered a glass cannon, as this deck can just absolutely pop off and destroy your opponent, or it can absolutely fall apart with a couple of rough Pokestops or rough, Biberos just not getting you the pieces that you need. This deck is very high maintenance. It needs to consistently churn through its deck, finding pieces that it needs to continue to set up, which is its only hindrance, especially with things like Eerie as well. You need to be even more careful on those resources as well, or else you can just lose games. So you have to be so careful with your resources, and you have to continue to burn through your deck properly to the point where you aren't going to be risking just losing to a brand new popular card like Aries. So it is a glass cannon. It does have, some issues. However, when you are able to get fully set up, it truly is one of the most powerful decks in the format, and I think has a chance versus anything. Alrighty, hopping into number 6 here, we have Snorlax. Snorlax is a deck that has been getting a lot of hype recently due to the additions of EUIC and also Hero's Cape from the brand new set Temporal Forces. Deck has very solid matchups against a lot of the top decks in format, taking a very strong matchup against decks like Charizard and Chien-Pao, and also relatively winnable matchups against decks like Lugia, even though a lot of people think that matchup is rough. With the double Giacomo, you at least have a shot at being able to beat them. You do better against the Lost Zone decks now, like Lost Zone Toolbox and Lost Zone Gutina, due to the fact that you have EUIC and also Fortune Sisters, which is able to capitalize on those big hands that they oftentimes grow, being able to strip those switch cards out of their hand with EUIC, and also being able to use Fortune Sisters to try and get those switch cards with that, and also potentially things like Mirage Gate. So you have more ways to beat Lost Zone Toolbox now. Not having Echoing Horn is fixed with the Mantine, which is able to pull a Pokemon from the discard pile onto the bench. The Hero's Cape giving you more HP is just very powerful in pretty much every matchup. Very solid card. The only issue that I think this deck has is that it's a little bit more variance based due to the fact that Peonia has rotated. The fact that Peonia has rotated means that you can lose games to just prizing horribly. If you prize your maybe double Silene and Pidgeot, or if you prize Pidgeot, you can run into just some problems in general. So that's another, I guess, kind of little problem. You do have the Hisuian Heavy Balls though to get the Pidgeot, but if you do prize, you know, really rough, and you prize a bunch of ball search cards and Pokemon you need, it's not going to be easy to get those things back a lot of the time. But the big thing is the supporters. You know, not being able to pull out the supporters out of the prize cards can be very detrimental, and also, you know, potentially, you know, prizing multiple counter catchers. So the deck is a little bit more variance based. I think that's, you know, one of the biggest things is that you can lose to just having really bad luck, and also not having VIP pass anymore can allow you to get ran over by some of those more aggressive decks in the standard format. Deck's very good. Deck takes some really good matchups against some of the top decks in format, but is a little bit more variance based without cards like Peonia. Next up, coming in at number 5, we have Lost Zone Gutina Toolbox. This is a deck that also, when the brand new set and post rotation was, you know, largely being talked about over the past couple of weeks, a lot of people were writing this deck off. But now, as people have begun testing it, people have come to realize that this deck is still incredibly powerful. Yes, you don't have cards like Path to the Peak anymore. However, you have new inclusions like the Iron Leaves, which help substantially against the Charizard EX matchup, and you also have Prime Catcher and Buddy Puffin. Deck is pretty much the same as it's always been, using those Comfeys and Colress's Experiment to get tons of cards into the Lost Zone, and then using that Mirage Gate to be able to power up Giratina. You also have the option to Iron Leaves versus any deck that is weak to Grass, giving you nice versatility in multiple different matchups. Overall, deck still very solid. Not a whole lot necessarily to say on it. It's Giratina. It's still great. Definitely not as powerful as it used to be. Path was just such an incredibly powerful card, but I still think is definitely a tier 1 deck, and I expect it to see lots of play moving forward. As a shot versus everything, Giratina is such an incredibly powerful card, and you still have great comeback potential with things like Roxanne. Prime Catcher as well is just an amazing inclusion into these Lost Box decks, and I definitely think are going to keep a lot of these Lost Box decks relevant just with how wonderful this card works in so many of these Lost Zone variants. Deck's great, nothing else to say about it, no complaints, one of the best decks in format. The only thing that could, you know, potentially be a detriment to it is it still is a little bit inconsistent at times, but when it gets set up, it's one of the most powerful decks in the format. Next up, coming in at number 4, we have Lost Zone Giratina with the Iron Leaves and also Aerodactyl. This is a deck that I have been testing quite a bit, and I actually think it has a lot of potential. Arceus Giratina, pretty standard deck, using Judge and Iono to be able to disrupt your opponent, and then using that Arceus' Trinity Nova to be able to power up Giratina V-Star. You have the Bibero as well for consistency with the Industrious Incisors, and you also have Aerodactyl, which has been seeing some play in these Arceus variants recently to try and combat the Lugia V-Star, which is one of Arceus' hardest matchups, which is honestly why the deck is not higher up. If Lugia V-Star did not exist as a meta deck, this might be the strongest deck in the format. However, having to play Aerodactyl does mean you hinder your consistency a little bit, and Aerodactyl in some situations will just be completely useless, which can be kind of annoying. But overall, you know, you're able to judge path, still a really good strategy, able to, you know, beat most things in the formats with that. Just very solid, you know, able to pretty much do what you need to do. And yeah, Judge is still great, you know, Trinity Nova is still great, not much else to say on it. Having Maximum Belt, really nice. Having EUIC as well, great for things like Chien-Pao. Just overall, very solid deck in general. Arceus has kind of always been good, and this is currently my favorite Arceus variant. Next up on the list, we have Charizard Bibero. Charizard Bibero is one of the most hyped up decks, honestly, in the formats. I will say I do not know why both of the Charizards were separated on this list, so I do apologize for that. It looks a little bit weird, but there are just 3 Charizard EX in the list. But anyways, this is the list that I have constructed. I've been really enjoying it. I think it's a little bit more inconsistent than the Pidgeot version. However, if you are able to set up and draw well, it does have a little bit of a higher ceiling, because Pidgeot, yes, is able to get you whatever you need. However, it can be considered a liability, where something like the Bibero, you're not guaranteed to hit what you need, and it's a one prize. So if you just are able to hit what you need with Bibero, then Bibero is admittedly better than Pidgeot. However, it can be a little bit more consistent, and your early turns can be a lot more shaky without things like Rotom and Luminion to be able to get those early, stable board states. So you do run a little bit of a higher risk. However, if you do get fully set up, you will be rewarded heavily with the Bibero version. Deck's good. It's able to use Prime Catcher paired up with Cypher Maniacs or Arven is really powerful. Gives you a lot of control on your opponent's side of the field. I really like double counter catcher as well in this deck. You just always want to be able to gust. You're typically falling behind, so having that double counter catcher, double boss, I've been really enjoying. And yeah, overall, list has felt really nice. I have been considering energy search potentially for this deck to be able to just get yourself an energy. Something like Earthen Vessel could be used just to be able to get multiple fires into the hand to then be able to pull off that. You also get to thin a card for next turn for something like the Bibero to be used for more cards as well. So you get to thin out with something like the Vessel 2, which, could potentially be good, as you can search it with Arven 2. Then also use the TM Devo, because I guess one problem I have been kind of running into with this deck sometimes is I'll get the TM Devo, but I won't get the energy. So, sometimes having that, energy search card could potentially be useful. But overall, really solid deck. Really no complaints. I definitely think it's one of the best decks in the standard format. Alrighty, next up at number 2, we have Lugia V-Star. Now, this is a deck that I've been honestly shifting my opinion on quite a bit. There have been some days where I've really liked it, some days that I haven't really liked it, and I've been kind of moving it around in my tier lists. And at the moment, I have it comfortably at the number 2 spot. I think with decks like Stall and Arceus getting a lot of hype, I think Lugia becomes even better. It has a chance versus pretty much everything except the Iron Hands matchup. You really can just overpower anyone with that Shinshino, being able to hit pretty much unlimited damage with it, knocking out anything in its way. Lugia is still an incredibly powerful attacker with that Summoning Star, being able to get multiple Archeopses onto the field, and just overall the engine is just incredibly powerful. I originally had 3 research and no Serena in the deck, but after some more testing, I've really begun to like Serena a little bit more. It works very nicely in this deck, because there are just some situations where you have research and you just don't feel comfortable researching away a bunch of energy. So having Serena allows you to be a little bit more conservative in the early to middle portions of the game, not discarding energies and potentially just discarding the Archeopses with them. So personally, I've liked that quite a bit. Overall, deck feels very solid. I've been enjoying it quite a bit, and yeah, it really has a shot versus everything. The only hindrance with the deck really is its consistency. It's its own worst enemy. When it gets set up, it's pretty much unbeatable. However, it just runs into so many consistency problems, oftentimes in the early game, almost to the point where I've been considering going second with it to at least get a supporter off. But the upside is just so incredibly high when you set up. The deck just becomes almost impossible to beat if you truly get, fully going, which is why I think that its upside outweighs its downside. Lugia is strong as ever, incredibly powerful, one of the most powerful decks in the format, and I think definitely makes its case for the second best deck in the format. Next up at number 1, probably to no one's surprise here, we have Charizard Pidgeot. Charizard Pidgeot, in my opinion, is the best deck in the standard format. From all my testing, this deck has came out as the safest pick for upcoming tournaments and really has no issues. Charizard with Pidgeot is an incredibly stable and consistent deck that has tons of control and outplay potential with that Pidgeot EX. You have brand new cards put into this deck like Maximum Bout and Eerie, which add a lot of depth and cool things that you can do, and you still have the traditional package of Charizard, Charmeleon, you know, the Pidgeys, the Pidgeots, Radiant Charizard, Rotom. You got the whole gang here. You got pretty much everything that you need in a Charizard deck, along with some brand new cards. You did lose cards like Battle VIP Pass. However, you did gain Buddy Buddy Puffin, which makes up a little bit for it, and you still can play heavy ball search cards like Nest Ball and Ultra Ball to try and pretty much make it feel like Battle VIP Pass never left the format. Cards like Maximum Bout really do help out in that Chen Pao and also Mirror Match. One of the nice things about this version is that you can search out boss at any point, meaning that you don't need a card like Prime Catcher and you can use something like that Maximum Belt instead. The Bibero version is not able to search out boss, you know, guaranteed at any point in the game because there's no Luminion. And you don't have Pidgeot as well, so you want to play Prime Catcher so that you can go Arven for Gust Effect, whereas in this deck, you can just search for bosses auras at any time you need. So that's why I think Maximum Belt works a little bit better. Overall, deck's absolutely incredible. No problems with it. Really, really powerful. Has pretty much a shot versus everything except control. And if you want to tech for the control matchup, you can add a 101 Gengar line, the Dark Gengar, which gives you that option to retreat all the time, which is really, really good against stall decks. Overall, deck's amazing. No complaints. In my opinion, it's the best deck in the standard format. But with that being said, let me know what your opinions are on this top 10 list. Let me know if you disagree. Let me know if there's anything that I missed. I will make an honorable mention to Lost Zone Toolbox. That has been a deck that has begun to see a lot more play, and I think definitely has some, you know, potential, just as potentially like Lost Box Roaring Moon. You know, moving forward, definitely would not be surprised to see that deck seeing some success. But yeah, anyways, with that being said, thank you so much for watching. This is Smart TCG. I'll be back with some more Pokemon TCG content in the future, and I'll speak with you again soon. Peace out.